who played the champion for
Kevin Spacey.
Kevin Spacey, right?
Yeah.
Kevin Spacey. How quickly we forget. Yeah.
Hey, Unfinished Business television fans, show your love for all things retro and movie magic by grabbing some awesome gear from 80sts.com. Your go-to spot for the best nostalgic t-shirts from your favorite movies, TV shows, and pop culture classics. Use promo code UBTV at checkout to save on your order and support Unfinished Business television. While you're at it, relive the classics, wear the memories. Shop now at 80sts.com with code UBTV.
So, Mr. Harry Weiner, thank you so much for coming on and meeting with myself and Jeff today. We've been following your career since SpaceCamp, but also the variety of television projects you've done, many of which I've actually watched during COVID when I was just at home with my YouTube on my Fire Stick looking for all these old TV movies because there was just nothing new out. And then seeing like, oh, the guy at the SpaceCamp also did this Judith Light movie. So it's like a nice little versatile body of work that you've done, both with TV movies, feature films, and with episodic. So before you got into directing, what was it that kind of gave you that bug to pursue this profession?
Well, I was hell-bent towards politics, law school, and trying to make a powerful impact on the world around me at a troubled time when I was growing up in the 60s, right? And then I became disenchanted with the political process. I didn't have a thick enough skin to be able to condone what was going on around me. And I went to the University of Michigan and made a film for the sesquicentennial, the 150th anniversary of the university. And it was the first movie I had ever made. And I did it with a couple of fraternity brothers and sorority sisters, and we made a musical. And I knew so little about filmmaking that it was for an annual carnival, that fair that they would put on at the university. I know so little about filmmaking that I didn't know there was a thing called sync sound. So I recorded the music and the singing on one track and had the film on the other. And when we were showing the film, I had to keep my finger on the tape so that it would correspond to the movement on the screen. And the movie got some accolades and in the community that we were living in. And so that was my first introduction to filmmaking. And when I was becoming disenchanted with the pursuit of the path of law and politics, I was thinking about, I saw 2001, the movie, and I spent probably 3 or 4 days with a friend of mine. We didn't go to sleep. We were just trying to figure out what the hell that movie was about. And I said, any movie that can make us think that much, is a pretty powerful medium. And I realized how many of our values were shaped by the heroes that were portrayed on the big screen, and realized that perhaps I could make an impact, the kind I wished, and the contribution, the kind I aspired to make the world a little bit better place through making movies, and shaping some of the values, or influencing, not shaping so much, but influencing some of the values that we all have by the stories that I would tell. So I left law school at the University of Michigan and went to USC in Los Angeles and, set my course there. I thought that I would go for a year, try it. And of course, I spent the next 30 years of my life there.
Well, in your career, you've worked with a lot of up and coming now character actors. When you see them successful, do you kind of feel like maybe a proud parent, like, look what they graduated onto, and I kind of helped shape them?
Well, I did have, I must say, a lot of experience with actors, young people on the way up, and whether or not it was Joaquin Phoenix or whether or not it was Armie Hammer, or whether or not who was the third Spider-Man.
Oh, Tom Holland?
No, go one back.
Andrew Garfield?
Andrew Garfield?
Andrew Garfield. Andrew Garfield. He was in Veronica Mars, a television series. I worked with him, and in each instance, I must say, there was something, a spark about them. Of course, Leaf Phoenix, which was Joaquin's name when he was much younger, he was 10 years old, so it's hard to see the extraordinary career that lay in front of him. But his brother, River Phoenix, certainly, had established a quality of being in front of the camera and I know how close the two of them were because River would come to the set and help out Leaf when Leaf was terrified about getting in harnesses to be suspended from the ceiling to create a sense of weightlessness. And there were some really memorable moments where River gave him the courage to take a shot, So as I've watched, by the way, Jim Carrey was one of those people that were very young, in some television series that he and I worked with together. So it's been, I don't know if I feel as if I'm a proud parent, but I really enjoyed the trajectory, how life works. I've had the good fortune of living long enough to be able to see, have the experience of working with them, sensing a spark. Andrew, Jim Carrey. I mean, I remember going to the comedy club in LA, and to see, after working with Jim on this series, it was an okay series. It wasn't a stellar series, but he was sort of reined in to playing a character that, when I went to the club and saw the range of what his comedic gifts were, I said to him, "Listen, man, you've got to, carve your own path here, and you've got something extraordinary to offer." He could just become another human being, by all of the observations of human behavior around him, and then have great fun with becoming those characters, So that's about, how I feel about working with these young people that became significant. Bradley Cooper. There was a very dear friend of mine, James Lipton, who had a famous television series, right, inside the actor studio. And I was directing Alias, a television series. And Bradley comes on, and I find out that he had worked with Jim, and so became, very bonded through our common friendship. And his careers, he was remarkable when we worked together. And interestingly enough, he was supposed to be in one of my movies for television, and then playing basketball and broke his ankle. And Patrick Dempsey stepped in order to play the character that he was going to play. But good guy, and what a wonderful talent.
So having so many television credits in your career and then making the jump into a feature film, whether it's SpaceCamp or House Arrest, what kind of adjustments as a director do you have to make going between the two mediums?
It's the difference between running sprints and running a marathon, right? The same craft is involved. You can dream bigger because of, in those instances of SpaceCamp in particular, you had more resources, obviously. And you had a much larger team that you had to work with, so everything is scaled up. But the process is the same. And I remember I had a wonderful, wonderful mentor when I was in film school who taught me all my craft as a director, but he was reluctant, after having been burned in the film industry a bit, to ever feel his work was good enough to take it public. And so he would never stage a play for an audience, or never go forward and make a film because the script was never quite good enough. So I decided that, you know what, I was going to go into television because I could use that as a immediate means, like a sketchbook of learning my craft and getting feedback of what worked and what didn't work, because I thought that was an essential step in the process. So there's all sorts of thoughts I have about that stage of my career, but it was in making series television that I came to meet Leonard Goldberg, who was the producer of SpaceCamp. And I did a number of episodes with Leonard, and also through working with him, I met a studio executive who was brilliant at ABC, Brandon Stoddard, a wonderful, wonderful man and talent, and somebody who shepherded talent. And when I was first starting out, I this is like a long roundabout answer to your question, but when I was first starting out, the movie I made for film school got me an AFI internship with John Schlesinger, the director, who's just done Midnight Cowboy, right? And everyone told me, don't be an intern on a movie. You'll do nothing. And I chose to do it because I'd never been on a major set before. And John proved to be a lifelong friend and gave me all sorts of opportunities on Day of the Locust, which was starring Donald Sutherland. And when I was done, I had some heat because of my movie and because of having worked with John. And one of the opportunities that was made available to me was to become an executive head of comedy or director of a comedy at ABC. And after several meetings over several months, I go in to meet the president of the network for his final blessing, which was sort of a done deal. And I was sitting in the lobby while he was on the phone finishing a business call. And I was watching all these suits go in and out of the office. And when I finally was called in, I realized, wait a second, I don't want to be a suit. I want to be a director. I want to be a filmmaker. I want to fulfill the vision that got me going there. So I go in to a guy who's going to hire me and tell him, excuse me, but I decided that I don't want the job. Thank you very much. I want to be a director. And I'm fearful that my career is ruined in Hollywood. And instead, he says, I totally understand. There was a moment in my life where I had a crossroads and had to make a similar kind of decision. That was Brandon Stoddard. 5 or 6 years later, Brandon Stoddard becomes the head of ABC Motion Pictures. They went into the film business, right? And their second film was SpaceCamp. And when I left Brandon's office during this seminal moment, I said to him in my own naive, ridiculous way, you know what? One day I hope we get a chance to make a movie together, And of course, these years later, Len Goldberg is going to be producing SpaceCamp. And so I write to Len and I write to Brandon Stoddard. And I said, this is our opportunity. I was in your office and I reminded him of the incident all these years ago. And this is our opportunity to make that movie that I suggested, way back when. And he said yes. And so that gave me my opportunity in order to direct SpaceCamp. SpaceCamp, the fantasy that it was, set in space with all sorts of visual effects, but without the kind of budget that could support the kind of visual effects that Star Wars had created or any of these others. It was a challenge, a huge challenge, and but one that I felt completely prepared for, given the experience I'd had to date. Does that answer your question?
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Well, with Space Camp and House Arrest, you kind of make, at least with those two films, fantasies come to life for kids or teenagers, what have you. And I was just wondering, when it's like, when you're working on a film like House Arrest, where you have a majority of the cast being children or underage, but then you have more the adult actors, how do you like work around, I guess, the film day? Like, how many hours are dedicated to the scenes with the children, and then how many hours are dedicated to, the adult actor scenes?
Well, that's a great question, and I wish I had the memory that could answer it adequately. But I'll tell you this: because the parents, for the most part, were in the basement, and the children were upstairs, they were shot on different days,
Okay.
right? Because once you're, in the house upstairs, it was all built. It was a set. The interior was all built on a stage. And at CBS Radcliffe, which I understand is now being sold to condominiums, unfortunately, it was a fabulous studio, small studio. But for the most part, except when the younger cast members were interacting with the adults, they were separated.
Oh, okay.
Now, going back to Space Camp, obviously you have this incredibly talented cast and the likes of Kelly Preston, Larry B. Scott, who we've been trying to get on the show forever, and Leah Thompson, who I had a crush on back in those days, still do now. But one of the things that stood out to me outside of the cast was getting John Williams to do the score. And he rarely did anything outside a Steven Spielberg movie or a George Lucas film. How did you land such a legend for this movie?
That was all Len Goldberg. Len Goldberg was a major producer. He went on to run Paramount, if I'm not mistaken, for a short time, and had been heads of major network studios previously. And Spelling Goldberg, which was Len Goldberg and Aaron Spelling, were I don't even know if there's anybody today that's comparable to it, but had just, Shonda Rhimes. They were the Shonda Rhimes of that era. They would have 7 shows on the air at the same time. So Len was a major player and well connected. And to this day, I have no idea what he was able to pull in order to get John. He showed John the film, the fine cut of the film, and John, to his credit, responded very enthusiastically to it, which was great. But it was a gift. It was the high point. There's a reason why a John Williams is a John Williams. It's not by happenstance that he lucked out. The kind of human being he is, and the kind of insights that he brought, and the kind of dedication, compassion that he brings into a room, and through his medium of music, his ability to really capture the adventure of a lifetime. I think that all of his films have a certain spirit that makes you feel a certain way that he somehow saw within the context of SpaceCamp, the potential for that, within SpaceCamp. So I'm forever grateful for having had that experience and collaboration with John, who's now got to be 91, something.
Yeah, he's up there.
Yeah. And I was looking at the in memoriam yesterday, and I'm so grateful I have to reconnect with John because I'm fearful that he'll be up there all too soon, you know.
Yeah, I think this new Spielberg movie might be the last one he does, but that hasn't been confirmed yet.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
With Space Camp, it's Tate Donovan's first big screen performance, and Joaquin Phoenix's, then going by Leafs, first big screen experiences. But I guess my question is not only with them, but with actors in general. When it's their first time really being in front of the camera, they've made it through the audition process and everything. But do you find sometimes you have to give them maybe a little extra attention or a little extra confidence in their performances?
It totally depends on the individual, as you can imagine. You know, some people are just born to it, and naturals, and others you just want to break down the walls that sometimes that are there out of fear to protect themselves. Um, and there were certainly moments with Joaquin that need to be broken down. And once again, as I mentioned, his brother was an enormous help there.
Mm-hmm.
The security they provided, the family was remarkably supportive and embracing of one another, and you felt that connection. With Tate. Tate just had a lovely quality and inherently that he brought to the screen, and um, you know, I think that there was very little that I had to do with Tate to make him feel comfortable. Once they overcome the hurdles, as you said, of the audition. Once they had the part, they're not going to be booted from the role, and then it's up to them and their craft to be able to find a way to respond in each moment as honestly and appropriate to whatever the material is, and Tate had that going for him.
What was it like working with Tom Skerritt? Because he's like one of my favorite character actors, and he always projects this calm, like somebody that you feel safe to be around. And in this case, he's trying to help get the kids back on Earth in the mission control. So, what's it like directing somebody like him? And he's still around today too.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I what movie I had seen him in. Top Gun, I think, came out the same year that SpaceCamp did.
Yeah.
So it would have been the film. I mean, think about the 80s were pretty remarkable. Back to the Future, Top Gun, all of the younger skewing films that were made for a young audience, but had a great spirit to them. But I'd seen Tom in a movie just probably a year or two before. I'd have to go back and IMDb it to see which film it was. But right from the get-go, I said, we've got to get Tom, because he brings a gravitas and an honesty and a charm to the role, and that was appropriate also for the character that we were trying to create. And he's a pro. He was experienced. He could just slip into those like slippers and be at home in the role, as being the grown up in the room, if you will. So there's not much I can say other than that. That's all that Tom brings to every role that he undertakes, as far as I'm concerned.
When it comes to television projects, more the movie side, like with Men Don't Tell, is it sort of like pitching a more of a Hollywood film, or are you like called in and offered the script more and seeing if you want to work on it?
Both.
Okay.
Listen, when I was first doing them, I would be asked to direct them, right? And then once I got established as somebody in command of that medium, then I was able to pitch some of the projects and produce them myself. But that is unfortunately a lost medium. There was so much good work that was done on these shoestring budgets. It was like indie films for television, and because they were generally more emotional and character driven, because they were more contained, not all, but most. You could really create some great characters, and there were some wonderful actors that were, working in that medium. And I'm was always sorry to see that go, but that was a consequence of FinCEN. Do you know what the financial and syndication rule was? And I think it was '98 that it was canceled. That rule, federal regulation, prevented the networks at the time from producing the material that they were airing. So to avoid monopolies where you produce everything that's happening right now, you produce, you hire the talent, you exhibit what it is that you've created, and have total control over the project. Before that rule was removed, when the networks could produce the material, independent producers could. And the independent producers were trying to find stories that they were genuinely drawn to. In many instances, and not infrequently, they were issue-oriented, thoughtful, probing pictures that were dealing with issues of the time, And when it became a business, meaning the networks were now responsible for finding the stories and deciding who the actors were and what they were wearing and where the locations were, you lost that thumbprint of the creative energy that propelled so much of what had been created up until it came to an end. So in answer to your question, yes, I in many instances I was hired, and people would submit scripts to me, and I would decide which ones I wanted to do. And in a number of instances, I would sell the project and go off to produce and direct it.
And don't tell. So with that film, was it very difficult to cast given the subject material of spousal abuse, but from the woman against the man? Because it seemed like, I know there were a lot of, from what I read, pressure groups that were really against this film when it came out. So what were the challenges with trying to find the right two actors to get that across?
I was shocked to find out how many men felt as if they'd had spousal abuse. Once the subject was raised, it's sort of like you pull up the rock and see the maggots underneath. It stands to reason when you think about it. I mean, you of course hear the physical abuse of women, which is horrifying. But there was emotional, psychological abuse from men. I remember after the screening that we had of the movie, I'm driving down Wilshire Boulevard. I think the screening was at the Writers Guild, and a car pulls up to me at a red light. It was like an Aston Martin or a Rolls or something to that effect. And it turned out it was one of the leading agents in LA. Okay. At the company that I was being represented by, and he motioned for me to roll down my window. I did. And he says, "I cannot tell you how close to home that movie was. Here's a guy who's like worth multi-millions of dollars and one of the most successful people in the whole community. And he's talking about revealing to me, that, he'd been struggling with this. So Peter Strauss, who had Rich Man, Poor Man, from the time I saw that miniseries, I'd always loved and had a tremendous amount of respect for Peter Strauss, right? And I needed a great actor to pull that off. And, he jumped aboard immediately. And then Judith Light, who is such an underrated and actress and glorious human being, so dedicated to so many issues. She jumped aboard and just, seized that opportunity, with fervor, total commitment. And at the time, because it was something that I was hired to do, I wasn't aware of the larger sociological or psychological environment in which this story came forward. I just wanted to tell it as honestly as possible. But as a consequence of making it, I learned to what extent, and I've gotten so many notes over the years about people who've seen it and trying to track down some additional information about the film because they related to the circumstances.
I've also noticed in researching your career, with a certain actress like Jennifer Love Hewitt, where, she first appeared in House Arrest, and then she was on Party of Five, which you directed and produced a few episodes for. And then she gets her own show, Time of Your Life, which she showcased. But then a young actress on that show, Jennifer Garner, who then went on to Alias, which you worked on. And I just wanted to know, was that just like a happy coincidence, all of that, or...
Well, as I'm sure you both know, I mean, the film business is about relationships primarily. Mm-hmm. Not most businesses are, but more so, I think, intently in the film business. And so Party of Five, I had just finished SpaceCamp, and my daughter was going to a school. And Chris Kaiser, who was the showrunner, the writer, the creator of Party of Five, his daughter was a friend of my daughter. and Chris remains one of my dearest friends. And he asked me to come because he knew that he hired Jennifer off of SpaceCamp. And so he offered for me to come direct an episode at a certain time, and so we began that relationship. And then Time of Your Life was produced by Chris as well. It was a spinoff of Party of Five. So, that's why, because of my relationship with Jennifer, I went on to direct an episode of Time of Your Life, and then met Jennifer, who was, she was playing the best friend and a small role, but she was just such a great person. And, you saw, bingo, like we were talking about earlier, this person's really talented, And so when she got Alias, it wasn't a surprise at all. Then was thrilled to have the opportunity to see her in such a powerful role and a great opportunity for her.
I want to ask you about the movie When You Remember Me with Fred Savage, because there's a number of things that stand out, but one of the things that stands out is Ellen Burstyn playing sort of the evil nurse of that whole facility that he's in. Were there ever concerns that her part was too similar to Nurse Ratched from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest?
Ellen had was supposed to play Nurse Ratched, and she couldn't play Nurse Ratched, and that's when what was the actress's name who got the Academy Award for it? But
Louise Fletcher.
Louise Fletcher.
Took it over, and so I think I can't even begin to assume I understand why Ellen picked this role, but I'm forever grateful that she did. I mean, she's a remarkable actress, and I had the opportunity to work with her, I think, 3 times. You know, and then it was, what was the name? Who's the other actor besides who played the champion for
Kevin Spacey.
Kevin Spacey, right?
Yeah.
Kevin Spacey. How quickly we forget. Kevin Spacey was represented at CAA and did not want to act in anything unless it was a star-making role. Okay, and he was waiting for his first feature, and he was turning down everything left and right. But for some reason, he took on this role, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was the first role, perhaps the only time he worked in television, you know, as an actor. And then I think I'm not quite sure whether or not The Usual Suspects or American Beauty or what his first film was that he went on to make immediately thereafter. And then, of course, he took off. But Kevin was talk about somebody who you see at a certain point in their career and who has talent. I mean, Kevin was not an easy man. And there's all sorts of things I could say that I won't, but but he was unquestionably powerfully talented. You know, what a talented man, and it was no surprise. You know, you knew that this guy was going to be a huge star, and he delivered. You know.
In the TV project Stay the Night with Barbara Hershey, there's a shot in there. I don't know if you're going to remember this, but I guess it's when the teenager's mother first sees him running off with Barbara Hershey, and it's the shot is just a bunch of glimpses through a train passing. And I was wondering if that shot was in the script, or was that like just an artistic flourish from you, or maybe the director of photography?
It was definitely an artistic flourish, because I saw, listen, that's the wonderful thing about filmmaking, isn't it? You go, and once you see a location where you're going to be filming, you have the opportunity to just walk around, absorb it, and see how it inspires you, and what thoughts come to mind. And in this particular instance, we were in Georgia, and the small town in Georgia, and there was train tracks there, and a train that would come by frequently each day, and you're always looking for something that's kinetic and take advantage of its motion pictures, right? And unusual ways of serving the narrative, and so came up with that idea, and it felt emotionally right. That's the most fun part about making a movie. There's two times in the process of making a movie that are the most gratifying. One is before there's anyone else on the set. And you're just in your imagination, but absorbing the environment and then allowing it to inspire whatever it is that serves the story you want to tell. And the other's in the editing room, where you see it all come together, and you see the options that are available. Everything else is chaos.
I can agree to both, personally.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm sure.
Now with JFK Reckless Youth, I actually have two questions. One is obviously this is like almost a Superman. I'm sorry.
What was the beginning of your question?
Oh, well, the beginning of my question is regarding JFK Reckless Youth. You obviously take sort of this Superman approach to Kennedy's life from his childhood all the way to his adulthood. What response did the family have to the movie when it came out? And have you also seen a resurgence of interest in it since the Love Story series came out about JFK Jr.?
No, I'm disconnected from that project. That'd be interesting to find out. I can't say I have any sense of if there's more response after this new Love Story series came out. In terms of the family itself, this is based on JFK Reckless Youth was based on a book by Nigel Hamilton called by the same name. And so all of these events had been vetted by Nigel when he was writing the book. So I didn't have any direct contact with the family at that time. But we had the support of the JFK Library for all of the research that we did. And, it was fascinating, particularly at that time, to take a deep dive into his life, because it was inspirational for me in the years that I was growing up, and Patrick Dempsey did and the cast as a whole. There was some beautiful people that were playing the various roles that had a certain life and that they brought to the characters that rang true. So for me, it was, as always with a story based on true events, you want to capture the spirit. You're not necessarily bound by the facts, but you want to remain true to the spirit of the events that went on. And I just recently went to a fundraising event for Jack Kennedy Schlossberg, who's the grandson of JFK, who is running for Congress in New York. And it was just interesting because Carolyn Kennedy was there, and just trying to and to finish his pitch for raising funds, he told the story of PT 109, which is something that we filmed in the television miniseries. So it was all these years later to be hearing from the family itself about the events that transpired that were so important to them. I remember how meaningful and touching it was when I saw what we had created. When it was all said and done, there was something that had a texture to it that I was very proud of.
Okay. When it comes to working in television more from an episodic realm as a director, when it's something like A Party of Five or Veronica Mars, are you briefed, I guess, before you take the job on maybe what the show's tone might be?
Yes. Well, part of the process of directing television is that each director that's brought in on a week-to-week basis, when it's not the same director every week, there's nowadays that rarely happened, if at all, in the 80s and 90s, but starting in the 2000s, the whole idea of the producer-director became a thing. And even though sometimes they would be only directing a couple of the episodes, they'd be overseeing the other directors. And so the director producer who would be hired would be sitting down and walking the new guest director through the the tone and the look and the characters, so that there'd be continuity. And part of the process of television series is that the director, the new guest director, sits down with the showrunner, and they go through the script from beginning to end, every page. And the showrunner explains what their intention is for each of the scenes. So the whole idea is, for that sense of continuity. I mean, one of my biggest learning curves, there were two. When I was first starting, I just thought, television series is like making a mini movie every week, And actually, that's when I met Leonard Goldberg. I was doing a television series called Heart to Heart. I was having a grand old time, but the television series was infamous for chewing directors up and spitting them out because R.J. Wagner and Stephanie Powers had their own ideas and were very opinionated about the people they wished to work with, And so I'm making my movie, and I get called in at the end of the series to Len Goldberg's office, who I met for the first time at that time. And it was spacious. I remember the moment, a little slack-jawed going in because of the position that he held in the industry. And I sat down, and he said to me, "Harry, you made a wonderful movie." I said, "Oh my God, Len Goldberg saying I made a wonderful movie." He said, "Now I want you to make a heart-to-heart." And I was the first lesson about how it's a standardized product. Less so nowadays than it was then, but still in many shows that's the case. And I spent the next 7 episodes trying to figure out how to not compromise my creativity and create a heart-to-heart. And when I looked at the 7 episodes at one point, a year and a half later, whatever, I saw that the final episode that I had done was indiscernible from any of the other heart-to-hearts. I'd accomplished Glenn's goal. But I looked at the first episode I did, and it was so imaginative, creative. I said, I'm not long for episodic television. I don't want to lose that creative spark in an effort to create a product, And to Len's credit, he supported that, and I think that's why he continued to hire me in other shows to bring that spark, But anyway, and then finally, I was working on a show to remain unnamed, and much later in my career. And it was over Christmas, between Christmas and New Year's. For some reason, we were working during that time. And the executive producer, the showrunner, all the execs on the show were on vacation, And it was a script that I wasn't thrilled with, and it had a certain sort of noirish quality, and I was going to do the noir opening and got permission before the showrunner left for his vacation to do that. And then with the DP, we sort of said, "Oh, this is pretty cool. Maybe we should do that throughout." Now, I hadn't had the opportunity to sit down with the showrunner and do the things that I'm telling you was part of the parcel. And so when the showrunner came back and saw what it is that I'd done, boom, that was the last time we worked together. But it was very, very imaginative, and I'm sorry that it worked out that way. But that's why they have these standardized approach, or these means of keeping it relatively standardized.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about the Oscars and, essentially the state of the industry right now with the impending merger with Warner Brothers and Paramount, which as we're recording, it's not final yet. But a lot of the guests we've had on the show have told us about the struggles of surviving in the industry now because of streaming platforms, less people going to the theater, and even regular television is not what it once was because people are cutting the cord and they're watching Netflix or they're watching Prime videos. So from your perspective, what does it take for young up-and-coming filmmakers and television aspiring producers to survive in this industry right now?
Well, you can never go home again, right? How things were will never be again. How things will be, we are in the process of creating, right? So what do I mean by that? Right now, I'm teaching at NYU, young emerging filmmakers. So we are, discussing all of what you've just asked on a regular basis. How does AI impact the future of these aspiring filmmakers? How do all of the changes in the structure in Hollywood impact emerging filmmakers? On the one hand, the industry is going through a huge transformation, right? And because of the amount of money that's being spent in consolidating the various network studios, streaming services, the amount of money that's available for purchasing new products and taking or projects and taking chances is lessened. For right now, the film industry has always been cyclical. So on the one hand, all the aspiring filmmakers, creatives, and whatever aspect of the industry have to continue to create because the more you create, the better you get in mastering your craft. So you look around and you say, okay, what's happening? How do I create? Well, you've got vertical cinema, you've got the internet, you've got YouTube channels, you've got the opportunity to create 3-minute television episodes online. And if your idea catches on, then fantastic. And if it doesn't, you try something else. There's a fellow that I met, a fellow who created a company called Fallen Media. And he was smart enough to recognize a niche that needed to be filled. And that's what I encourage everybody to do, to see where there's a hole and then try to figure out a way to fill it. And he sort of targeted Gen Z. And he had writers and directors of young filmmakers go out and create these little reality television series with a concept they might have. It might be two charismatic personalities, young personalities who find strangers on the street in Washington Square Park and say, okay, come and see whether or not you two are interested in dating one another. And so they have like the dating game with two total strangers, and that becomes like a series in this sort of fun episodes that unfold. The answer to your question is you've got to respond to the world that is in front of you and not long for the world that no longer exists. And there are tremendous opportunities there. A person who's creative need not only be creative on television or in the movies. You don't maybe necessarily have to be Chris Nolan or Ryan Coogler, or Greta Gerwig. You might be experimenting with an idea that right now is a 3-minute episode, but then if it hits, it's something that can be transformed into a much bigger concept in a different platform. You may find that by creating, as I've seen with my students in this AI class, they're coming up with ideas, images that were unfathomable, months ago, let alone years ago. They might be in a museum exhibit or an installation or, projected on the side of a building. Playing around with the medium, playing around with actors, playing around with visuals to see what emotional impact they may have. And then when you're called into action on a larger format, you're prepared. Just apropos of that, when I graduated film school, it took me years before I directed my first project that I got paid for. And I was, writing scripts. I was DPing. I was editing. I was doing educational films. And then when I finally directed my first project, I realized, and I was bemoaning the whole process of what I was doing all of those years, saying, God, what I really want to do is direct, right? But when I finally had that shot, I realized that everything I had been doing in that period of time was preparatory for the moment when I had to rise to the demands of a larger project. So the only way you can really respond to challenging times that exist in a business is to find a way to continually hone your craft.
Well, I know we're coming to an end on this interview, but I just also want to say one of the things I appreciate about you as a director and as a human being is that the movies that you make kind of remind me of 1940s movies where they're not necessarily sensationalistic or verbose, but you have to be creative in the way that you make these films because you have, when it's a television project, you have censors. So obviously you can't use certain language, at least at the time, or film certain things, but you always found a way to get your ideas or the story across. So I just want to thank you for that.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for saying that. I appreciate that. So I'll tell you one brief talk about the 40s. Okay.
Okay.
I'll tell you one brief anecdote talking about film and career arcs, etc. My mentor that I referenced, right, when I was at film school, I spent 2 years making my capstone film. Every weekend I would go up over the Grapevine in Los Angeles to the San Joaquin Valley. I was filming it, God knows why, but it was on a farm and it was a period piece. It was ridiculous. When everything was all said and done, the first person I wanted to show my film to was my mentor. So I took it to him and he looked at it. And this is the guy who things were never good enough to be seen by anybody, right? That I referenced earlier. And he looked at the film and he eviscerated it and me. I had left Detroit, which is where I'm from, and left law school in a whole trajectory that was really covered because I had such a wonderful extended community in Detroit, to go to LA where I knew no one and took a chance on film, and here all my efforts were being torn apart, torn to shreds by somebody I respected so highly. It was the first time and only time in my life I considered suicide. I walked out into the USC courtyard that was at the time not the Golden Palace it is now, but the wooden clapboard series of buildings, and with the sunlight blazing off of the white painted walls, and just seeking some solace in a darkened room someplace. So I go into a classroom that was dark and my eyes hadn't adjusted, and I sat down in the last row just to contemplate my fate. And it turned out that classroom was the one where they would project films periodically as part of a big class that Arthur Knight used to teach, who was a big film critic of the time. And I'm sitting there in the dark, and the projector comes on, and the movie is projected on the screen. And the movie was It's a Wonderful Life. And Jimmy Stewart is sitting there contemplating suicide, and I'm sitting there bawling my eyes out, weeping as I go on the journey with him to a final conclusion that, life might be worth living after all. And when the lights came up, I realized if I could reach one person in a darkened theater by something that I created, as Frank Capra reached me, then no matter what it is I had to go through in order to get there, was worth it. So that's my 1940 story.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, that really meant a lot. And I'm glad you're here because, like I was mentioning earlier, when the pandemic hit and I was home and I'm watching all these films, some of that stuff, even like the heavy movies like, When You Remember Me and Men Don't Tell, it kind of made me write stuff that was pretty heavy that I wasn't going to touch on for the longest time. I even wrote a movie about my own racial bullying experience as a short film while the George Floyd protests were going on. And it was because of movies like that, I said, I got to tell this story and do it like in the very hard hitting approach that you did your film. So I thank you just for even sharing that and showing that, you actually made a difference for a lot of people.
Well, listen, the best of luck to you guys, and a real pleasure talking with you. Where do you live, Jeff?
I'm in Brooklyn, New York.
Well, isn't that where you are, Andre?
I'm in Staten Island.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm not far from him.
Yeah.
So you guys have met in person.
Oh, yeah.
We hang out like almost every week.
All right. Well, God bless. Take good care. And it was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you so much, Harry.
Thank
Really
you so
appreciate
much.
it.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Okay.